Part 1. The Call of the Wilderness. John Harper wasn't your typical hero. He didn't wear a cape or have superhuman strength, but he had something just as powerful, a deep love for nature and an unshakable sense of duty. A carpenter by trade, John lived in a small mountain town where life moved slowly. Every weekend you could find him packing his backpack with essentials, some water, snacks, a first aid kit, and heading out into the wild. For him, hiking wasn't just about escaping the noise of everyday life. It was about connecting with something bigger than himself. Mount Silverpine was one of his favorite spots. It was rugged, untamed, and full of surprises. On this particular Saturday morning, the air carried a chill that hinted at winter's approach. The sun peeked through the trees, scattering golden rays across the forest floor. Leaves crunched underfoot as John made his way along the trail, enjoying the peaceful solitude. The only sounds were birds chirping and the occasional rustle of a squirrel darting up a tree trunk. As John climbed higher, he paused to take in the view. From this vantage point, he could see rolling hills blanketed in autumn colors, fiery reds, oranges, and yellows stretching as far as the eye could see. It was breathtaking, almost otherworldly. But just as he was about to snap a photo with his old camera, something caught his attention. At first it was faint, barely audible over the wind, a muffled cry, like someone calling out for help. John froze. His heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. No response. Maybe it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Shaking off the thought, he started walking again. But then he heard it again, louder this time. This wasn't his imagination. Someone was in trouble. Without wasting another second, John began moving toward the sound. Pushing past thick bushes and scrambling over rocks, he followed the faint cries until they grew clearer. That's when he saw him, a man lying near a rocky ledge, clutching his leg. Blood soaked through his pants and his face was pale with pain. "Hey, are you okay?" John rushed to the man's side, dropping his backpack beside him. The stranger groaned, trying to sit up but failing miserably. I think I broke my leg," he said weakly, wincing as he spoke. John knelt down, assessing the situation quickly. He'd taken a basic first aid course years ago, but this was no minor scrape. The man needed immediate medical attention. Still, panic wasn't an option. Not here, not now. "All right, stay calm," John said firmly, his tone reassuring despite the tension bubbling inside him. "Let me see what we're dealing with." He opened his backpack and pulled out the first aid kit. Using strips of cloth and sturdy branches he found nearby, he fashioned a makeshift splint to stabilize the injury. All the while the man watched, him with wide, grateful eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," the stranger muttered between clenched teeth. "If you hadn't come along." John cut him off gently. "Don't worry about that right now. Let's focus on getting you down the mountain safely." It wasn't going to be easy. They were miles away from the nearest road, and the terrain was treacherous. But John refused to let doubt creep in. One step at a time. That's how he approached everything in life, whether it was building furniture or climbing mountains. With great care, John helped the man to his feet, letting him lean heavily on his shoulder. Together, they began their slow descent, each step deliberate and measured. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they navigated narrow paths and slippery slopes. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the base of the mountain. By then, paramedics had arrived, alerted by a ranger station John had radioed earlier. As they loaded the man onto a stretcher, he grabbed John's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "My name's Ethan," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I won't forget this, John. You saved my life today." John smiled modestly, brushing off the gratitude. Just doing what anyone else would have done. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was different. There was something about Ethan, an air of quiet confidence, maybe even mystery, that lingered in John's mind long after the ambulance disappeared down the winding road. Little did he know, This chance meeting was only the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The stranger lay crumpled near the rocky ledge, his face pale and drawn with pain. John knelt beside him, his hands steady but his mind racing. He could see the man's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood seeped through the fabric of his torn pants. The sight made John's stomach churn, but he forced himself to focus. This wasn't the time for hesitation. "Hey," John said firmly, trying to keep his voice calm despite the tension bubbling inside him. "Can you hear me? What's your name?" The man groaned, squeezing his eyes shut as if even speaking caused him agony. "Ethan," he managed to whisper after a moment. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the rustling leaves around them. "All right, Ethan, I'm John. You're going to be okay, but we need to take this step by step." John reached into his backpack and pulled out his first aid kit. It wasn't much, just some bandages, antiseptic wipes, and a small roll of gauze. But it would have to do for now. Ethan tried to sit up, wincing sharply as he shifted his weight. "I don't think I can move," he admitted, his breathing shallow and uneven. "My leg, it hurts too much." John nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Without proper care, Ethan could lose a lot of blood or risk further injury. But they were miles away from help, surrounded by nothing but trees and rocks. If they wanted to get Ethan off the mountain, they'd have to work together, and fast. "Let me check your leg," John said, rolling up the hem of Ethan's pant. Leg carefully. What he saw made his heart sink. The skin was bruised and swollen, and there was a deep gash just above the ankle. Blood oozed steadily from the wound, staining the dirt beneath them. "This doesn't look good," John muttered under his breath. He grabbed a clean cloth from the kit and pressed it against the cut to stop the bleeding. Ethan hissed in pain, his fingers digging into the ground as he fought to stay still. "I'm sorry," John said quickly, glancing up at Ethan's face. "I know it hurts, but we've got to stop the bleeding before we can do anything else." Ethan nodded weakly, gritting his teeth. "Do what you have to do," he said, his voice trembling. For the next several minutes, John worked methodically, cleaning the wound as best he could and wrapping it tightly with gauze. He knew this was only a temporary fix. Ethan needed professional medical attention soon. But getting him down the mountain wouldn't be easy, not with such rough terrain and no way to carry him properly. As John finished tying off the makeshift bandage, he looked around, assessing their surroundings. The trail they were on was steep and rocky, with loose gravel that could easily send someone tumbling if they weren't careful. Carrying Ethan outright wasn't an option. They'd both end up injured. Instead, John decided to improvise. He scouted the area, searching for sturdy branches and pieces of wood that could serve as support. After a few minutes, he returned with 2 long, straight sticks and some thick vines he'd found nearby. Using his pocket knife, he stripped the bark off the branches and tied them securely to either side of Ethan's injured leg, creating a crude splint. "This might pinch a little," John warned as he adjusted the splint. Ethan clenched his jaw but didn't complain. When the splint was finally in place, John stepped back to examine his handiwork. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. For now. "Okay," John said, crouching down beside Ethan again. "We need to get moving. Can you put any weight on your other leg?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. "A little," he said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "All right, here's the plan," John explained. "I'll help you stand and we'll take it slow, 1 step at a time. If the pain gets too bad, let me know and we'll rest." With that, John slipped one arm under Ethan's shoulders and used the other to steady him as he rose to his feet. Ethan leaned heavily on John, his uninjured leg shaking under the strain. For a moment, they stood there like that. Ethan's labored breathing filling the silence between them. "You ready?" John asked softly, bracing himself for the challenge ahead. Ethan gave a slight nod. "Ready." And so they began their descent. Each step was agonizingly slow, every movement deliberate. John guided Ethan carefully, ensuring he didn't slip or lose his balance. The path was treacherous, littered with roots and jagged rocks, but John refused to let doubt creep in. He focused on the task at hand, reminding himself that giving up wasn't an option. As they moved, Ethan occasionally spoke, his voice strained but grateful. "I don't know how to thank you," he said during one of their brief pauses. "If you hadn't come along." John shook his head, cutting him off. "Don't mention it. Just focus on getting down safely." But Ethan persisted. "No, seriously, you didn't have to stop. You could have kept going, finished your hike, and never known I was here. But you didn't. And I won't forget that." John shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same. Ethan smiled faintly, though there was something in his expression that hinted at deeper gratitude. Whatever it was, John didn't dwell on it. They had bigger problems to solve. Hours passed, or maybe it just felt that way. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they navigated the winding trail, inching closer to safety with each painstaking step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the base of the mountain. There, waiting for them, was a team of paramedics who had been alerted earlier by a ranger station John had contacted via emergency radio. The relief was palpable as the medics rushed forward, gently lifting Ethan onto a stretcher. As they secured him in place, Ethan reached out and grabbed John's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he said earnestly, his eyes locking onto John's. "I mean it. I owe you everything." John smiled awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. Like I said, anyone would have done the same. But Ethan wasn't convinced. Before the paramedics wheeled him away, he added one more thing. "This isn't over. I'll find a way to repay you, John. Count on it." John watched as the ambulance drove off, its siren wailing in the distance. He stood there for a moment, staring after it, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Saving Ethan had been instinctual, a reflex born of compassion and training. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from ordinary. Something about Ethan, the way he carried himself, the intensity in his gaze, stayed with John long after the ambulance disappeared from view. Little did he know, this chance meeting was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. John stood at the edge of the trailhead watching the ambulance disappear down the winding road. The red and blue lights flashed one last time before vanishing entirely, leaving behind only the quiet hum of the forest. He exhaled deeply, the weight of what had just happened finally settling over him. His hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had been coursing through his veins for hours. He glanced down at his clothes, mud-streaked jeans, a sweat-soaked shirt, and boots caked with dirt. His backpack, usually so neatly packed, now looked like it had been through a war zone. The first aid kit inside was nearly empty, its contents sacrificed to patch up Ethan's injuries. John couldn't help but chuckle softly to himself. "Guess I'll need to restock this thing," he muttered aloud, shaking his head. But as he started walking back toward his truck parked a short distance away, something tugged at the edges of his mind. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or the lingering tension from the rescue. It was Ethan. There was something about the man that didn't quite add up. Sure, accidents happened all the time on trails like Mount Silverpine. People underestimated. The terrain slipped, fell, got hurt. John had seen it before. But there was an air about Ethan, a quiet confidence, maybe even authority, that didn't fit the image of your average hiker. John climbed into his old pickup truck and turned the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, he replayed their brief conversation in his head. Ethan's gratitude had been genuine, almost overwhelming. Most people would have simply thanked him and moved on, but Ethan had gone further. "I owe you everything," he'd said. Those words lingered in John's mind, heavy with meaning. And then there was the promise. "This isn't over. I'll find a way to repay you." What did that even mean? John shook his head again, brushing off the thought. Maybe Ethan was just emotional after such a harrowing experience. Who wouldn't feel indebted to someone who saved their life? Still, the intensity in Ethan's voice and the way he'd said it, like it was more than just a casual remark, stuck with John. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that lets your thoughts run wild. By the time John pulled into the driveway of his small cabin, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He grabbed his backpack and headed inside, tossing it onto the kitchen table. His dog, a scruffy mutt named Max, greeted him enthusiastically, tail wagging furiously. John patted Max absently, lost in thought. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the day, from the moment he'd heard Ethan's faint cry for help to the final glance they'd exchanged. As the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, it all felt surreal. Had it really happened? Or had he imagined the whole thing? No. The mud on his boots and the ache in his muscles were proof enough. But why couldn't he shake the feeling that this was more than just a random act of kindness? Days passed, and life returned to normal, or so it seemed. John went back to work, crafting furniture in his modest workshop behind the house. The smell of sawdust filled the air as he sanded and shaped pieces of wood, losing himself in the rhythm of creation. Yet no matter how hard he tried to focus, his mind kept drifting back to Ethan. One afternoon, while taking a break from sanding a chair leg, John decided to check the local news online. Maybe there'd be a mention of the rescue, some closure, to put his mind at ease. After a few minutes of scrolling, he found what he was looking for, an article about a hiker injured on Mount Silverpine. The details were sparse, but it confirmed what he already knew. Ethan had survived thanks to prompt medical attention. What caught John's eye, though, was the photo accompanying the story. It showed Ethan sitting upright in a hospital bed, smiling weakly despite the cast on his leg. At first glance, the picture seemed ordinary enough, but then John noticed something odd. The background. Behind Ethan was a window overlooking a skyline dominated by towering skyscrapers. Skyscrapers, how could that be? Mount Silverpine was miles away from any major city. Confused, John zoomed in on the image. That's when he saw it, a logo embroidered on the sleeve of Ethan's hospital gown. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, unless you were looking closely, but John recognized it immediately. It was the insignia of Caldwell Enterprises, one of the largest companies in the country. John had seen their advertisements everywhere, from billboards to TV commercials. They specialized in renewable energy solutions, pioneering technologies that promised to reshape the future. Everyone knew the name, and suddenly it clicked. Ethan wasn't just some random hiker. He was the Ethan Caldwell, billionaire entrepreneur and tech visionary. John sat back in his chair, stunned. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. All this time he'd assumed Ethan was just another guy out enjoying nature. But now, knowing who he really was, everything made sense. The confidence, the authority, the promise to repay him. Billionaires didn't make idle threats. If Ethan said he'd find a way to repay John, he meant it. For a moment, John felt a flicker of unease. What did Ethan have in mind? Would he send money? A gift? Something bigger? Part of him wanted to dismiss the idea entirely, to write it off as nothing more than polite gratitude, but deep down he knew better. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Over the next few days, John tried to push the thought aside and focus on his work, but it gnawed at him, this nagging curiosity about what might come next. Then one morning, as he was sipping coffee on his porch, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up, he saw a sleek black car pulling into his driveway. Out stepped a sharply dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. John set his mug down and stood up, squinting against the morning sun. "Can I help you?" he called out, unsure of what to expect. The man approached, extending a hand. "Are you John Harper?" he asked politely. John nodded, shaking the man's hand. "Yeah, that's me." The man smiled warmly. "My name is Robert. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Caldwell." John's stomach flipped. So it had begun. John wiped his hands on his jeans, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease as the sharply dressed man, Robert, stood in front of him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. A billionaire's assistant showing up at his modest cabin. It was like something out of a movie. "Mr. Caldwell sent you?" John asked cautiously, trying to keep his tone casual despite the whirlwind of thoughts spinning in his head. "Yes," Robert replied with a polite nod. He opened the leather briefcase he'd been carrying and pulled out an envelope embossed, with gold lettering. "This is for you." John hesitated before taking it. The envelope felt heavier than it should, both physically and metaphorically. His fingers brushed against the smooth paper as he turned it over in his hands. "What's this about?" "It's from Mr. Caldwell," Robert explained simply. "He wanted me to deliver it personally and ensure you received it." John stared at the envelope, unsure whether to open it right there or wait until later. Politeness won out. "Thanks," he said, tucking it under his arm. "Would you like some coffee or—" Robert shook his head with a small smile. "No, thank you. I have other matters to attend to. But Mr. Caldwell did ask that I extend his gratitude once again. He truly appreciates what you've done." With that, Robert gave a slight bow, turned on his heel, and walked back to the black car. Within moments, the engine purred to life, and the vehicle glided down the driveway, leaving John standing alone in the quiet morning air. The envelope burned in John's hand as he watched the car disappear into the distance. What could possibly be inside? Money? A thank you note? Something else entirely? His mind raced with possibilities, each one more improbable than the last. Finally, unable to resist any longer, he tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper. The letter was handwritten, not typed, a personal touch that surprised John. As he read the first few lines, his eyebrows shot up. "Dear John, I hope this message finds you well. First and foremost, let me express my deepest gratitude for your selfless act on Mount Silverpine. You saved my life when no one else could have reached me in time. Words cannot fully capture how much your bravery means to me." John paused, rereading those sentences. Gratitude, he understood. It was natural after what had happened, but the tone of the letter went beyond mere appreciation. There was something earnest, almost urgent about it. "I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." The letter continued. "But I would like to try. Please allow me the opportunity to show my thanks in a way that reflects the magnitude of what you've done. Enclosed is an invitation to meet me at my headquarters in New York City. I believe we have much to discuss, not only about the events of that day, but also about the future." John flipped the page over, half expecting to find more details, but the letter ended there. Instead, tucked inside the envelope was a glossy card bearing the logo of Caldwell Enterprises. Printed neatly below the logo were the date, time, and address for their meeting. 3 days from now, in Manhattan. His heart thudded in his chest. New York City? That was a world away from his quiet mountain town. He'd never even been to a big city like that. The idea of stepping into the gleaming skyscrapers of Caldwell Enterprises felt like walking onto another planet. And yet, part of him couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. Who wouldn't want to know what Ethan had in mind? For the rest of the day, John wrestled with indecision. On one hand, going to New York seemed ridiculous. He was just a carpenter, a simple guy who liked working with his hands and spending weekends hiking. What could a billionaire possibly want with him? Maybe it was better to decline politely and move on with his life. But on the other hand, Ethan's words kept echoing in his mind. A debt I can never fully repay. Those weren't empty phrases. If someone like Ethan made a promise, they meant it. And deep down, John couldn't deny the flicker of excitement building inside him. This was an adventure he hadn't seen coming, an unexpected twist in an otherwise ordinary life. That evening, as Max curled up at his feet and the fire crackled softly in the hearth, John sat down with a notebook and pen. He scribbled pros and cons, weighing the decision carefully. Ethan clearly valued what John had done. Declining might seem ungrateful. Meeting him could be interesting. After all, how many chances did someone get to see the inner workings of a global empire? It might lead to opportunities he couldn't imagine yet. Traveling to New York would cost money he didn't exactly have lying around. He'd feel completely out of place among suits and skyscrapers. What if Ethan expected something in return? Could John handle that kind of pressure? By the time he finished writing, the pros outweighed the cons. Still, the final decision wasn't easy. John leaned back in his chair, staring into the flames. In the end, it came down to one thing: trust. Despite knowing so little about Ethan, John trusted him. There was something genuine about the man. The way he'd looked at John during their brief encounter, the sincerity in his voice. Whatever Ethan had planned, it wasn't malicious or manipulative. Of that, John was certain. The next morning, John called the number listed on the invitation card. A friendly woman answered, confirming the details of his trip. Flights, accommodations, transportation, all arranged by Caldwell Enterprises. When she asked if he needed anything else, John chuckled nervously. "I think I'll manage," he said. "But, thanks." As the days leading up to the trip passed, John found himself preparing in ways he hadn't anticipated. He dug out his nicest pair of jeans and a button-up shirt he rarely wore. He polished his boots until they gleamed. He even practiced tying. A tie, though he doubted he'd need it. Most importantly, he mentally rehearsed what he'd say to Ethan. Should he act humble? Confident? Casual? Finally, the day arrived. John packed a small bag, said goodbye to Max, and drove to the airport. As he boarded the plane, clutching his boarding pass tightly, he felt a strange mix of excitement and nerves. The flight attendant greeted him warmly, and soon the aircraft lifted off the ground, soaring toward the bustling metropolis where Ethan awaited. Looking out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below, John couldn't help but wonder, what exactly was waiting for him on the other side? The plane touched down in New York City late in the afternoon, and John stepped off feeling like he'd landed on another planet. The air smelled different here, sharp and metallic, mixed with the faint scent of exhaust fumes and hot pavement. Everywhere he looked, towering skyscrapers stretched toward the sky, their glass facades reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun. People rushed past him in every direction, heads down, phones in hand, moving with a sense of urgency that made his small-town pace feel painfully slow by comparison. John adjusted the strap of his backpack and glanced at the address Ethan had given him. It wasn't far from the airport, but navigating the city streets was already proving overwhelming. Subway maps plastered on walls seemed like puzzles he couldn't solve, and the honking horns of yellow cabs created a symphony of chaos around him. After a few moments of hesitation, he flagged down one of the taxis idling near the curb. Caldwell Enterprises building, he told the driver as he climbed into the back seat. The driver nodded knowingly, glancing at John through the rear-view mirror. "First time in the city?" "Yeah," John admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Kinda obvious, huh?" The driver chuckled. "Don't worry about it. Everyone looks lost when they first get here. You'll figure it out." As they drove, John pressed his face against the window, taking in the sights. Street vendors shouted, over the noise selling everything from hot dogs to knockoff watches. Neon signs blinked above crowded storefronts, and massive digital billboards flashed advertisements for products John had never heard of. The sheer scale of it all left him breathless. Back home, life moved at a slower rhythm. Here, it felt like the entire world was sprinting forward without looking back. When they finally pulled up outside Caldwell Enterprises, John's jaw dropped. The building was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a towering monument of steel and glass that seemed to pierce the clouds. Its sleek design was modern yet elegant, with greenery climbing up portions of its exterior, giving it an almost futuristic vibe. Outside, people dressed in sharp suits bustled in and out of revolving doors, clutching briefcases and laptops. "This is it," the driver said, pulling to a stop. "You sure you're ready for this?" John laughed nervously, handing over the fare. "Guess I'll find out." Stepping onto the sidewalk, he straightened his shirt and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. He walked toward the entrance, feeling increasingly out of place among the polished professionals who breezed past him. For a split second, he considered turning around and catching the next flight home. But then he remembered Ethan's words. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. Whatever happened next, walking away now would feel like breaking a promise, not just to Ethan but to himself. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Gone was the chaotic energy of the streets. Instead, there was a hushed calmness, punctuated only by the soft hum of conversation and the gentle clinking of heels on marble floors. The ceiling soared high above, adorned with intricate light fixtures that cast warm, inviting glows. A massive reception desk stood in the center of the room, staffed by impeccably dressed individuals who greeted visitors with practiced smiles. John approached the desk cautiously, suddenly hyper-aware of how underdressed he must look. Hi, he said, clearing his throat. I'm here to see Ethan Caldwell. My name's John Harper. The receptionist didn't bat an eye. Instead, she smiled warmly and picked up a phone. Mr. Caldwell will be right with you, Mr. Harper. Please take a seat. Relieved, John sank into one of the plush chairs lining the waiting area. He fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, trying to steady his nerves. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Finally, a familiar voice broke through the quiet. John. He looked up to see Ethan striding toward him, looking even more composed than he had on the mountain. Gone were the torn clothes and bloodied leg. In their place was a perfectly tailored suit that screamed success. Despite the transformation, there was no mistaking the same warmth in his eyes that John had seen during their rescue. Ethan extended a hand, which John shook firmly. It's good to see you again, Ethan said, his tone genuine. Thank you for coming. No problem, John replied, managing a small smile. Though I gotta admit, this place is a little intimidating. Ethan laughed, gesturing for John to follow him. Don't let the shiny exterior fool you. At its core, this company is about making a difference. Come on, I want to show you around. They stepped into an elevator that whisked them upward, faster than John thought possible. When the doors opened, they emerged into a sprawling office space filled with natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Employees worked at sleek desks surrounded by plants and artwork, creating an environment that felt alive and innovative. Ethan led John through the maze of cubicles, introducing him to team members along the way. Each person greeted John with respect, though he could tell they were curious about why this unassuming man from the mountains was visiting their billionaire boss. Eventually, they reached Ethan's private office, a corner suite with panoramic views of the city skyline. Ethan motioned for John to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. As John settled in, Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee from a silver carafe and handed one to him. So, Ethan began, leaning back in his chair. How are things back home? John shrugged, sipping the rich brew cautiously. Same old, same old. Work keeps me busy and the hikes keep me sane. That's something I admire about you, Ethan said, his expression thoughtful. You live simply but intentionally. Not many people do that these days. Well, I don't have much choice, John joked lightly. Small towns don't offer a lot of distractions. Ethan smiled, nodding slowly. Then, after a moment of silence, he leaned forward, his demeanor shifting slightly. Listen, John, I didn't bring you here just to catch up. There's something I want to talk to you about, something important. John set his coffee cup down, his pulse quickening. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about what happened on the mountain, Ethan continued. About how your action saved my life, and not just my life, but everything I've built, everything I stand for. He paused, searching John's face. You probably don't realize this, but Caldwell Enterprises isn't just about profits. It's about creating solutions for the future, building sustainable communities, combating climate change, helping those in need. None of that happens without leadership, without vision. John listened intently, unsure where this was heading. That's great, he said carefully. But what does it have to do with me? Ethan clasped his hands together, his gaze unwavering. Here's the thing, John. You saved me because it was the right thing to do. No strings attached. That kind of selflessness is rare and powerful. It inspires trust, integrity. Values like that are exactly what we need more of in this world. And frankly, they're values I think you embody naturally. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'm flattered, really, but I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at. Ethan smiled softly, leaning back again. What I'm saying is, I'd like to offer you a role within Caldwell Enterprises, not as some token gesture of gratitude, but because I believe you have something unique to contribute, something meaningful. John stared at him, stunned. A role? Doing what? That depends on you, Ethan replied. We have projects all over the globe. Renewable energy initiatives, community development programs, disaster relief efforts. Many of them involve construction and hands-on work. Your skills as a carpenter, combined with your practical mindset, could make a real impact. Plus, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Plus, I think working here might give you opportunities you haven't considered before. Opportunities to grow, to leave a legacy. The weight of Ethan's words settled over John like a heavy blanket. On one hand, the idea was thrilling, a chance to step outside his comfort zone and make a tangible difference in the world. On the other hand, it was terrifying. How could someone like him fit into a place like this? What if he failed? I appreciate the offer, John said slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. But I'm not sure I'm cut out for whatever this is. I mean, look at me. I'm just a guy who builds furniture and hikes on weekends. This whole corporate thing, it's not really my scene. Ethan nodded understandingly. I get that. Trust me, I do. But hear me out. You wouldn't lose who you are. In fact, I think you'd amplify it. Imagine using your talents to build schools powered by solar panels, or homes designed to withstand earthquakes, or community centers that bring people together. Those aren't just structures. They're lifelines, and they're built by people like you. John sat quietly, letting the words sink in. For years, he'd taken pride in his craft, finding joy in creating something beautiful and functional with his own two hands. But he'd never imagined his work extending beyond his workshop or his town. Could he really play a part in something bigger? Finally, he looked up at Ethan, a flicker of determination sparking in his eyes. If I say yes, what happens next?